The judge looked at him, a blind 13-year-old boy, and spat words sharp enough to cut through the courtroom air. "You can barely see your own nose, young man. You want to come here and talk about proofs, about evidence? This isn't kids' play. This is a real court." The judge's voice was deep and tired, like old wood creaking under too much weight. David didn't see the judge roll his eyes, nor the sneer flicker on the prosecutor's lips. But he felt it. He sensed the wave of mockery in the room, a shift in the air's temperature. The prosecutor, with her sharp, expensive perfume, smelled like she was already tasting victory. The judge smelled of stale coffee and boredom. To them, this was just another case, a nuisance on a dull Tuesday. But oh, if they only knew. Minutes later, barely 2 minutes, the same judge was loosening his silk tie, the tight knot suddenly suffocating, sweat dripping from his forehead in pure disbelief. The boy, with no light in his eyes but a universe of sounds in his mind, was presenting a sequence of details so precise, so absurdly accurate. Even the top forensic experts with their state-of-the-art equipment had missed them. It was like watching a giant cargo plane, heavy and majestic, defy aerodynamics, flip backward in midair, and perform a maneuver that defied all laws of physics. Impossible. Yet it happened, right there before everyone's eyes. Stay with me, and I'll tell you how a 13-year-old blind boy left an entire New York courtroom speechless and, on top of it, gave a lesson in justice and perception no one expected. In the Bronx neighborhood where David lived, dawn had its own soundtrack and distinct smells. For David, blind since a car accident when he was 3, it wasn't sunlight that announced the new day, but the unmistakable aroma of toasted bread rising from Mr. Charlie's deli down below on the street. That smell mingled with the early morning dew, the damp asphalt, and sometimes the sweet perfume of a few hard-to-kill flowers clinging to the cracked sidewalks. For David, the world was a tapestry woven with threads of sound, smell, and touch. He knew the time by the growing noise of flip-flops pounding the pavement, the first honk of the bus climbing the hill, or the vendor shouting deliveries of water gallons. But that particular morning, the usual rhythm was broken. A noise came before the siren, the quick metallic click of a bike chain skipping a tooth on the gear, followed by a dull thud and a muffled cry. Then came the heavy, harsh smell of gunpowder mixed with metal, sneaking through the cracks of his window. David was already awake, not because of the bread, but pulled by a restless feeling humming in the air like an overstretched guitar string. Then the siren, sharp, piercing, sliced through the Bronx silence like a knife. It wasn't the ambulance siren, David knew that one, mournful, almost musical. This was the police siren, jagged, nervous, screaming instead of warning. David's heart pounded wildly in his chest. A frantic drum he could hear clearly inside his own ears, drowning out the other night's sounds. News traveled like wildfire, rushing up the alleys with the speed of fear. Mrs. Nelson, the upstairs neighbor, a kind lady with a warm smile and worn hands from folding candy wrappers to sell, had been shot in the shoulder during a botched robbery. The community was in shock. David's shock turned to dread when witnesses, caught in the heat of the moment, started naming someone. Luis. His 16-year-old older brother. They said it was him, fleeing on a bike with a bag full of gold. A bag that really held Mrs. Nelson's few jewelry pieces and the money from the week's candy sales. Luis. David murmured to himself, his whole body cold, disbelief drying out his throat. Impossible. David knew where Luis was that night. He had followed him, though blind, listening intently to every detail. Luis was at Joe's bike shop fixing the brakes on the old bike he used for pharmacy deliveries. David remembered every sound, the iron pedal creaking, echoing through the night, a constant sign that his brother was nearby, working hard. He could describe the sound of the hammer hitting the rim, the burnt smell of oil wafting from the shop, the music Joe always played on the old radio. Luis wasn't at the robbery. He couldn't have been, but the police didn't want to listen. They came like a storm, heavy boots hitting the door, harsh voices without patience. They slammed Luis against the wall. His head lightly bounced off the plaster with a dull thud that made David shiver. They took him to the precinct. David, desperate, tried to speak, to explain. My brother was at the shop. I heard him all night. The captain, a man with a grave, impatient voice smelling of stale coffee and cigarettes, banged the table so hard David flinched. "Blind doesn't see, kid. If you don't see, you can't testify. Go home. Let the adults handle this." The words, thick with scorn, hit David like a punch to the stomach. Blind doesn't see, doesn't speak. Go away. David went home with his mother, Rose, his heart heavy and bitterly certain that the world, this cruel, unjust world, would spin on without him, indifferent to what he felt or knew. Justice felt like an invisible monster with very real claws. Luis, after a brutal interrogation and a night in detention, was released, but with an accusation hanging over him like a storm cloud, his reputation stained and future uncertain. The family was devastated. Rose, a warrior who had raised her 2 boys alone, washing clothes for others, was exhausted but refused to give up. Days later, the court summons arrived, a formal, cold paper that seemed to deliver a verdict before trial. David, the blind boy, was to appear as a defense witness, a small victory, a thread of hope. But the prosecution, eager to close the case and present a culprit, had another plan, cruel: turn little David into a scapegoat, ridicule his testimony, and seal Luis's fate. They wanted the world to believe the blind see nothing and so cannot testify. Little did they know that for David, the world was far more than what meets the eye. The bus ride to downtown was a sensory torture for David. The familiar, organic sounds of the Bronx were replaced by aggressive honking, sudden brakes, and the impersonal noise of the elevated subway rushing on the tracks. David had never set foot in a courtroom. The only time he had felt the cold, polished wood of legal benches was when, as a small boy, he had fallen off the school music stage, an accident that ironically sharpened his other senses. Now entering the court, supported emotionally and physically by his mother Rose, who gripped his arm with a mix of fear and protection, the dry, conditioned air chilled his skin and tightened his chest. It wasn't the cold of winter mornings, but the icy formality, the impersonality of a place where destinies were decided by people unfamiliar with the smell of toasted bread back in the Bronx. The smell was peculiar and oppressive, a mix of old mold from stacked law books, yellowed paper, and pine-scented cleaner failing to mask the pervasive odor of anxiety and fear clinging to the wood benches and walls. Each step David took echoed differently in the spacious courtroom, revealing its acoustics and furniture layout, like a sonar drawing an invisible map in his mind. He heard the quiet murmur of people, the discreet creak of chairs, soft scraping of shoes on polished floors, a clerk's dry cough. Judge Randall, 58, with a reputation for swift rulings, a polite word for impatient and blunt, flipped through files without lifting his head. His thin-rimmed glasses slid down his nose, breath slightly labored, showing years of smoking. No minors, no witnesses, no victims. Disorder and wasted time, he muttered, mostly to himself but loud enough for David to catch. The undertone was clear: impatience. Precognition of a long day. The prosecutor, Catherine Lewis, a woman with a vibrant, almost shrill voice David catalogued instantly as a sharp sting, was first to speak. She stood, the dry swish of her impeccable suit cutting the air. Her voice rang with rehearsed authority meant to intimidate. "Your Honor," she began, with the formal court bow, "the witness present here, David, has complete visual impairment. It's undeniable he cannot identify people or objects visually. Therefore, I request that his statements be minimized, if not entirely disregarded, as his condition prevents the essential visual perception necessary for credible testimony." Those words, cloaked in polite prejudice, hit Rose like a thunderbolt. She stepped forward, voice choked but fierce, a lioness protecting her cub. "My son has an elephant's memory, doctor. He may not see with his eyes, but he sees with his soul and ears like no one else here. He knows the truth." Finally, the judge looked up, heavy, skeptical gaze landing on David standing beside his mother. "Memory isn't vision, ma'am. This isn't a Christmas pageant where we tell pretty stories. This is a court of law. Here we deal with facts. Evidence, what can be seen," he said. placing cruel emphasis on seen. David felt his face burn, an uncomfortable heat that crawled up his neck. It was shame, anger, and frustration to be disbelieved before speaking. He lowered his head, not in defeat, but to focus, to close off the outside world and open the files of his mind. He absorbed every sound, every vibration of the hostile environment. Each sound became a meticulously catalogued archive in his ears. The prosecutor's voice, as he'd noted, vibrated at a high frequency, a sharp hiss carrying authority she believed unquestionable. The judge, breath ragged between words, revealed not only a smoking habit but chronic impatience. David couldn't see facial expressions, hand gestures, or clothing colors, but he heard the fabric of the prosecutor's suit brushing as she shifted, the faint clinking of the judge's pen tapping the desk, the footsteps of a bailiff approaching and retreating. He couldn't see, but he catalogued it all, in the silence of his mind. He began assembling an invisible yet incredibly detailed puzzle of the room and its inhabitants. On the eve of the trial, while the city slept a restless sleep, David couldn't close his eyes. The tension was nearly tangible, and he felt it as a constant buzzing in his ears. The veranda of their small Bronx apartment was his sanctuary, where the neighborhood's nighttime symphony revealed its complexity, with his father's old tape recorder, a cassette, analog he knew like the palm of his hand. He started capturing street noises. They weren't random sounds, but puzzle pieces he was determined to assemble. The distant hiss of car tires, the intermittent bark of a stray dog, the measured rhythm of someone returning home late, the beat of distant hip-hop, a baby crying 3 houses down. David wasn't just recording, he was decoding. He replayed each file, each sound fragment, as if listening to the most beautiful music, deciphering each note, pause, harmony, and dissonance, building an acoustic map of the night no one else could see, but was as real to him as the pavement beneath his feet. Luis, his brother, was home after being detained and released. The experience had marked him broken. He wept softly in the next room, a muffled sound David could distinguish perfectly among the wind and old refrigerator hum. Luis's crying wasn't anger but despair, guilt that wasn't his. "If I'd come to pick you up, brother, if I hadn't stayed at the shop, maybe it wouldn't feel so heavy now," Luis lamented. Voice breaking, David, calm as only focus can bring, answered from his room. "Cry later, Luis. Now I need you to tell me everything that happened at the shop. Every detail. Don't hide anything. What did you hear? What did you feel? What did you smell?" Still sobbing, Luis described everything. With David's surgical questions, he recalled all. The unmistakable sound of Joe's hammer, metallic and repetitive, striking the bike's steel rim. The strong, acrid smell of burnt oil that always hung in the shop. Joe's old radio, playing its usual Tim Maya tune, the singer's deep voice filling the small space. And lastly, a dry tick, a metallic sound, when the mechanic, tired, dropped the screwdriver back onto the metal tray. David memorized every noise, every smell, every sensation Luis described. For him, those were the exact coordinates proving his brother's presence in that place at that time. But David didn't stop there. The next day, with a courage that surprised even his mother, he went to the police station and asked the clerk, a man with a lazy voice and air of disinterest, to play the tape of Mrs. Nelson's testimony. The officer, sneering as if David were a nuisance, allowed it, thinking the blind boy wouldn't understand a thing. "Go ahead, kid. Play detective. It won't change anything." David took the old headphones and concentrated, isolating himself from the police station's noise. On the tape, he heard the shot, a short, dry pop, unmistakable. T8. No 140, as the forensic report read aloud by his lawyer clearly stated. That 2-second difference was blatant to David, as obvious as the difference between a poodle's bark and a Rottweiler's. The sound waves, frequencies and echoes revealed the shot's true nature. He heard the echo bounce off the brick walls of the alley, a sharp, quick echo characteristic of a smaller caliber in a confined space. Then Mrs. Nelson's shocked voice, clearer. "The boy with the red cap. Red cap? Luis only owned a faded black cap from the local baseball team he'd worn for years. Something didn't add up. Something was terribly wrong. At that moment, David realized this wasn't just about proving Luis's innocence. It was about exposing a lie, revealing injustice that went far beyond his brother. He had the pieces. Now he only needed the right stage. The preparation unseen by others was about to become an unexpected revelation. The courtroom air was heavy, almost suffocating. Full of tension, David felt vibrating beneath his feet. Prosecutor Catherine Lewis looked triumphant, confident in her so-called irrefutable evidence. She called the ballistic expert, a serious-faced woman with a monotone voice holding a folder. The expert confirmed, with the certainty of technical authority, that the weapon used was a .40 caliber pistol. The markings on the bullet recovered from the victim's shoulder were clear and unmistakable. The micro-comparison analysis left no doubt. David's heart pounded wildly, but the recording he heard at the station, Mrs. Nelson's voice, the gunshot sound, it was a .38 revolver. The contradiction couldn't be starker. When David was called to testify, Judge Randall, waving a hand with impatience, said, "You may stay seated, young man. We don't want unnecessary exposure. Your testimony will be weighed with due reservations." The tone was condescending, almost pitying. David felt the disdain behind those words. Respectfully, "Your Honor," David answered, surprisingly firm, cutting through the murmurs. "I would like to stand. I want to feel the room. I want the court to hear me. I want justice to be done. And for that, I need to be standing." The judge sighed audibly, a sound of resignation. He expected a shy, frightened boy, but David, though young, conveyed uncommon determination. "Very well. Then, but be brief." David stood, cane folded in one hand, a symbol he would use not as a handicap, but as an extension of his perception. He walked slowly to the center of the room. Every step measured, every sound absorbed. The silence that followed was almost absolute, broken only by the soft brush of his shoes on the floor and the hushed whispers of the audience. He began, his voice clear and resonant, filling the space. "I didn't see the shot, Your Honor, but I heard it. And with all due respect to this court, I heard people lying here today." A loud, scornful laugh erupted from the prosecution, a shrill sound echoing through the room. Prosecutor Lewis, visibly irritated by the boy's boldness, tried to interrupt. "Objection, Your Honor. The boy is delirious!" But the judge slammed the gavel, making everyone fall silent. "Quiet. Let the witness continue." David waited for the silence to return, a calm on his face contrasting the stir his words had caused. "The expert," he continued, turning to the ballistic specialist who watched him with a mix of irritation and curiosity, "claims the shot was fired from a .40 caliber. But what I heard on the victim Mrs. Nelson's recording was a .38. Two different guns. Two different sounds, and I would say," the expert's face paled, confidence shaken. "That's nonsense," she snapped, voice faltering. "You didn't see the gun. How can you know the difference?" David smiled gently, not mockingly, but as someone about to reveal a truth. "I didn't need to see. Doctor, the sound wave of a .38 measures 22 newtonner with a sharp frequency and short echo. A .40 measures 28 sour with a deeper, more powerful sound and a longer reverberation. It's like two voices. The prosecutor has a high voice, the judge has a deep voice, even with their backs turned. I know who's speaking. With gunshots, it's the same. I've heard this kind of thing since I was 4, playing hide and seek in the alley, identifying friends not by voice but by footsteps, the sound of wind on their clothes, the earth vibrating beneath. The difference between a .38 and a .40 is as clear to me as the difference between blue and red is to the sighted." Judge Randall, who up to then had shown fatigue, scratched his beard, restless. His expression shifted from disinterest to forced curiosity, then genuine astonishment. The prosecution tried to change the subject, but David wasn't finished, and there was someone else in the alley. "Your Honor," he said, urgency rising in his voice. "After the shot, I heard running footsteps. They weren't my brother's. They were sneakers with soft rubber soles, like Zick's brand. Size 7, the runner wasn't tall, maybe 5'7", about 154 pounds. Mrs. Nelson said she saw a boy with a red cap. My brother Luis only has a black cap from the Yankees, faded from years of use. The one with the red cap is the drug dealer's friend from the corner, Tony Redcap. I know him by his footfall when he comes down the hill. He has a distinctive gait, dragging his right heel slightly, a sign of an old ankle injury. It's almost imperceptible to most, but to me, it's a sound signature, the audience gasped, the murmurs growing louder. The visibly shaken judge signaled the court clerk. Check the records for an individual nicknamed Redcap. Still stunned, the clerk searched the court database. After tense silence, she looked up, shocked. Your Honor, Redcap was arrested days before for drug possession and released. His record says he wore a red cap and size 7 sneakers at the time and has a robbery charge involving a .38 revolver. Coincidence? Judge Randall began sweating, forehead shining under the courtroom lights. What David revealed wasn't just details, it was concrete. Irrefutable evidence dismantling the prosecution's narrative and calling the official forensics into question. The blind boy, who could barely see his own nose, was seeing a truth no one else could. The courtroom was in uproar. The whispers, once subdued, became almost restrained cries of shock and disbelief. Judge Randall, face pale, forehead dripping with sweat, slammed the gavel repeatedly, but the sound was drowned by the shockwave sweeping through the room. Prosecutor Lewis, eyes fixed on David as if seeing him for the first time, was visibly shaken. David, with calm, defying gravity, approached the defense table. His steps were firm, determined. Each one a silent declaration of conviction. He reached out to Luis's public defender, a young woman who until then seemed more lost than confident. Doctor, please, David said, your phone. The lawyer, still stunned by the red cap revelation, hesitated briefly before handing over the device. David, with the familiarity of daily use, found the voice recording app, put the phone on speaker, and hit play. The first sound filling the room was the clear, unmistakable metallic tick of a screwdriver dropping onto a metal tray. It was the exact sound Luis had described, and David memorized. Then the unmistakable voice of Tim Meyer singing filled the room, a surreal contrast to the courtroom. Tension. David paused the recording. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Your Honor, David said, calm and controlled. This recording, made at Joe's shop where my brother was fixing the bike, was made by me at 9:43 p.m. that night. The shot in the alley, according to Mrs. Nelson's testimony and police report, was at 9:45 p.m., 2 minutes difference. He paused dramatically. Joe's shop is 2 miles from the alley. Can anyone run 2 miles in 2 minutes? Maybe an Olympic athlete, but not carrying a bike like witnesses say the robber did. More importantly, the sound of the robber's bike chain skipping a gear, which I heard clearly from my window, doesn't appear on Mrs. Nelson's testimony recording. The sound of my brother's bike chain from the shop is unmistakable. I heard nothing like that at the crime time. Therefore, Luis was not there. The prosecutor, desperate, refused to yield. That's a setup. There could be another hidden recorder. It's edited. You're making it up. Her once vibrant voice now sounded desperate. David turned toward her, and though he couldn't see, everyone felt his steady gaze. Maybe. Dr. Technology allows many things, but there is one thing you can't fake or edit. The voice of the man who shouted, "Run!" in the alley just after the shot. It was you who recorded Mrs. Nelson's statement, wasn't it? That recording faintly picked up a voice stuttering with a very specific stammer. The only one in this neighborhood who stutters like that is Tony Redcap. Want to compare voices, Doctor? The court clerk, nerves stretched thin, barely waited for permission. She extracted the audio of the shout from Mrs. Nelson's recording, and hands trembling, played it side by side with Tony's police record voice from a prior stop. The courtroom sank into absolute silence. First, the faint stuttering voice from the alley recording, "Run! Run!" Then clear and unmistakable Tony's voice with the same stammer, identical. There was no denying it. It was him. Judge Randall coughed nervously. The dry sound echoed through the room. His antiseptic eyes were wide with shock. Prosecutor Lewis tried to speak, but her voice failed. She opened her mouth. No sound came out. She sat heavily in her chair, the pieces fit. The truth, invisible to most, revealed by a boy who saw with his ears. Judge Randall, dignity shaken, face paler than wax, suspended proceedings for 10 minutes. 10 minutes that felt like eternity. In that brief pause, David's truth echoed, shocking, surprising, and for many, shaming. In the hallway, Rose hugged Luis, both trembling, speechless. The public defender approached David, eyes full of tears and admiration. "How did you know all that?" she whispered. David simply said, "I just really listened." When the judge returned, his demeanor had changed. The initial arrogance was gone, replaced by a somber, almost reverent seriousness. He sat, adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, voice still a bit thick. Faced with the irrefutable evidence and the inconsistencies so exceptionally presented by this witness, David, the court cannot ignore the facts. He read the ruling, each word heavy in the air. Immediate dismissal of all charges against minor Luis Smith for lack of evidence and, more crucially, glaring contradictions and failures in the investigation and evidence presented by the prosecution. Furthermore, this court orders the issuance of a preventative arrest warrant and immediate redirection of investigations, focusing especially on the individual known as Tony Redcap. A mix of relief sighs and surprised exclamations filled the room. Luis, sitting beside his lawyer, wept, tears of relief that lifted an unbearable weight. Rose covered her face, tears slipping through her fingers, a mix of gratitude and joy. The judge then turned to David, standing motionless, absorbing every reaction, every sound. He wiped his forehead again, this time not with irritation but with cold sweat. The mark of a deep revelation. "David," the judge said, voice a near whisper, "you have an extraordinary ability, a perception that shames us all who rely only on what we see. I looked at you today and saw a waste of time. I was blind, wasn't I? The court thanks you for your courage and your vision." David smiled faintly, a smile mixing humility with a hint of ancient wisdom. "I just did my homework. Your Honor, life forced me to listen to what you often didn't want to see or bother to hear." The once silent courtroom erupted in applause. Sincere, emotional applause that honored not only justice won but the triumph of the human spirit. Rose rushed to hug her son, crying, holding him tight. Prosecutor Lewis left the room quickly through a side door, not looking back. The story spread like wildfire. Local blogs published the tale, and within 24 hours, a video clip of the trial recorded by someone in the gallery was online. It already had millions of views on YouTube. Titles like "Blind Boy Destroys Prosecutor," "Genius's Courtroom Lesson," and "The Boy Who Heard the Truth No One Saw." David became a symbol, an inspiration. His phrase echoed on social media. If you think you don't see, listen. If you think you listen too much, shut up and learn, because the truth is often in the details we ignore. 2 weeks passed since the courthouse. Verdict life in the Bronx still had challenges, but seemed to shine a little brighter. David's story had spread not only through alleyways and community streets, but across the city. The investigation's conclusion was swift and conclusive. Jerepin, that man with the dragging gait and peculiar stammer, was caught red-handed 2 days later trying to sell Mrs. Nelson's jewelry, the .38 revolver, the same one David had clearly distinguished in the recording, was seized. When cops caught him, he stuttered, trying to explain. All the sound clues David had pieced together were confirmed. Mrs. Nelson hugged David like a grandson. The gold ball and other pieces were recovered. Justice had indeed been served. For David, life changed. He returned to school not just as the blind boy from the Bronx, but as the genius with golden ears. His extraordinary talent became the talk of universities. A renowned forensic acoustics professor from NYU personally sought him out. Fascinated by his auditory skills, prestigious music college offered him a full scholarship. A dream he hadn't even dared to have was suddenly within reach. He could Finally dive headfirst into the world of sounds he so loved, turning perception into art. Judge Randall, in a public interview with a major newspaper, admitted his transformation. His voice in the article was humble. I was arrogant, prejudiced. To me, justice was about visual proofs, documents, testimonies I could see. David taught me that justice isn't just what we see, but what we hear, touch, and feel. He showed me each case has a melody, and that I was deaf to it. David taught me, above all, to truly listen. David's story became a beacon, a powerful reminder that truth often hides in the lines between words, in muffled sounds, in details most of us, with perfect vision, ignore. Seeing the world takes more than eyes. It demands all senses, and above all, the heart. If your breath is already taken by this real-life plot twist, hold on. The emotion isn't over yet. If you, like us, cherish these true stories of overcoming, people who turn the game when all seems lost, leave your like to strengthen the channel, to show we're in this together. Share this story with that friend who loves didn't see that coming tales, who enjoys twists no one expected. After all, the best stories are the ones we share, aren't they? And if you're left craving more, eager to see another myth deconstructed, meet another person who defied all odds and proved that the impossible is just a matter of perspective. Click the video playing now on your screen. It's more proof genius can emerge from the most unexpected places. Until next time. And remember, while you truly listen, while you allow yourself to feel and perceive beyond the obvious, truth dances freely, beautifully, on the tongue of those who dare to be quiet and feel. Never underestimate what you cannot see.